Welcome, welcome, friends. Oh, I am so honored to be sharing this episode with you today. It was an incredible experience to record this episode with Nicole. Nicole is the founder of Women of Ancient Futures, School of the Mystic Arts for Women on a Mission. And Nicole studied for 20 years with a wide variety of ancient traditions. And she received initiations from modalities and teachers from all over the world, from a 2-month initiation into West African Vodou in Benin to spending a total of 26 days in dark retreats in Mexico, 1 month in the Amazonian jungle with an indigenous tribe, and studying temple arts in Finland and India. With her school, she provides a space for women to weave mystic arts like mediumship, psychic abilities, ritual, and ceremony into their work as coaches, body workers, healers, and facilitators. Her mission is to bring back ancient wisdom into these modern times and weave something new, something magic, and something whole for the future. So before we start, I want you to know that what drew me in about Nicole was her initiation into West African Vodou in Benin. When I was studying in LA, I was doing anthropology and I had the opportunity to take courses outside of my major curriculum. And I chose a course called Vodou and Santeria, Black Atlantic Religion. And I was absolutely blown away by the magic and the tradition and the wisdom in everything that I was reading. Every lecture I was joining, I was like drawn in more. I wanted to learn more. And so I invited Nicole on because she has studied one-to-one with West African Vodou priests and priestesses. And she really embodies this wisdom. And she's going to share with us what's her background and the Vodou lineage in Benin that she got initiated to. And we're also going to go into the role of this ancient wisdom in our current world and how it can really help us, what the key pillars are of these types of healing modalities. And we will dive a bit deeper into the body and cycles and life cycles. And there is just something magical that happens when I gather in spaces with women who hold and guard such beautiful wisdom. And I hope that this episode is as inspiring for you as it was for me. Please let us know what you think about it. If you have any more questions for Nicole or for me, please reach out. And for now, enjoy listening. You're listening to the podcast of Iris Josephina. If you're passionate about exploring the menstrual cycle, cyclical living, body wisdom, personal growth, spirituality, and running a business in alignment with your natural cycles, you're in the right place. I'm Iris. I'm an entrepreneur, functional hormone specialist, trainer, and coach, and I'm on a mission to share insights, fun facts, and inspiration I discover along the way as I run my business and walk my own path on Earth. Here, you'll hear my personal stories, guest interviews, and vulnerable shares from clients and students. Most people know me from Instagram, where you can find me under @CycleSeeds, or they have been a coaching client or student in one of my courses. I'm so grateful you're here. Let's dive into today's episode. Welcome to the show, Nicole.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
I'm happy that you could make it. So we have many things to cover today. And I would just like to start with you sharing with us who you are and what the work is that you came to do here on Earth.
Yes, that's a big question that actually goes beyond my business. But yeah, my name is Nicole Costerus. I always struggle to describe like what my title is, so to speak. But at the moment, I love to call myself a medium and initiated priestess. But I also mentor women. I mentor women on their journey into mystic arts like mediumship, psychic abilities, and ancient rituals and ceremonies. So Women of Ancient Futures, my company, is an international school of mystic arts for women on a mission, because I specifically love working with women that are on a mission of their own. Yeah.
Love that. So when we spoke before we decided to create this podcast, I shared with you that I am very intrigued and very inspired by the Vodou lineage in Benin, where you got like initiated to. And
Yes.
I'm very curious whether you could share more about that, because I've always been inspired by like the Black Atlantic religious spiritual movement. I actually took a course in Vodou and Santeria when I was studying at UCLA, and I was
Nice.
so inspired by it. So I have like goosebumps every time I meet someone
Mm.
who is initiated in this and who knows about it. I'm like, please tell me everything. I'm so inspired.
Yeah, and it's like it's traditions that have been in the past very secretive, right? So it
Hmm.
is this mysterious traditions that also I think there is a lot of ideas that people have about it. Like
Yeah.
when I share I'm a voodoo priestess, the first thing they think of is that I probably have some dolls and needles in my home and I'm hurting people, right? I mean, it sounds funny, but in a way, that's the
Hmm.
first thing people think about when they hear voodoo. The interesting thing, that's one of the first things I discovered as I found my way to Benin in West Africa, is that these dolls and needles are not even part of the voodoo tradition. So there's two things that create these misconceptions around voodoo. The first one is Hollywood movies, where voodoo is being portrayed as something, as a tradition to hurt others, these dolls and needles. And the second part, which I have found across many indigenous traditions all across the globe, is that through colonization, the missionaries would come and basically demonize the practices of the people that practice the
Hmm.
indigenous traditions. So voodoo is one of them, but I also was in South America with the Yawanawa people, where also they were enslaved. Like the missionaries would come and preach Christianity and basically made their practices wrong. So I think these main two things have caused a big misunderstanding around what voodoo exactly is. And so as I found my way there, voodoo for me is actually a tradition very deeply connected to nature, to spirits, to plants, to rituals, to song and dance, to community. A very beautiful way where I would say they connect with nature through their bodies, through their voices, through their ritual practices. So it has been a great adventure for me to rediscover my maternal lineage because my mother is from Suriname, South America. But originally, the DNA comes from West Africa because of the
Hmm.
transatlantic slavery times. My ancestors were shipped from West Africa to South America. And I really wanted to reconnect to, yeah, like where are my roots actually, beyond where I can track it back in slavery times, where are my ancestors before they were taken from their land. And that led me to going to Benin because my DNA is from Nigeria. But Nigeria had code red for traveling, and I was traveling alone, so I didn't feel very safe to go there. And that's when Benin popped up. And through like a crazy set of synchronicities, I met my voodoo mother in Ouida, Benin. And I told her, I said, I've been looking for a teacher in voodoo for so many years. And she said, you found her. So within 24 hours of my arrival in Benin, I doubled my stay. I booked my stay with Martine, my voodoo mother, and I went through my first initiations into the tradition. Yeah.
Wow, what a special story. And I love how when we are like on the path that we need to be on, it always comes with these crazy synchronicities and everything falling into place so that it kind of like
Absolutely.
confirms to us like, yes, you're on the right path. Please continue. And the little glimmers and beautiful magical things keep popping up.
Absolutely. And then it's also about, do we have the courage to trust it,
Mm.
right? Because I was going there to tour around Benin and go to the Voodoo Festival just to have my first introduction with the tradition. And then within 24 hours, I feel this strong impulse to double my stay. I was calling my partner. I said, I feel I need to stay here. I want to do my initiation into voodoo. And he was like, what are you talking about? So even sometimes our environment doesn't fully understand, like, hey, what's happening with this person? She's suddenly going there. So it asks courage to trust those synchronicities and to trust that it's right, that the intuition is guiding you in that direction.
So beautiful. I had my own fair share of that. I went to Malta for 5 days and then I decided that I would have to move there.
Wow.
And my family was like, dude, you've been there for 5 days. What are you talking about?
Exactly. Exactly. But yeah, I think when it feels right, it's right. And I mean, I went through this process so many times over the last 20 years that I am, in different spiritual practices that I think my trust is so strong now that I just do it.
Yeah, you just
Yeah.
follow it. Once you have cultivated that kind of trust in something higher, but also yourself and a
Yeah.
relationship between both, it's just like, I have to follow it and everything's going to be okay.
Yeah, yeah. And it was a beautiful meeting because I had tried to find teachers before in the Vodou tradition, but I came across a lot of men and I had this
Mm.
because my work is with women only. And so I had this deep longing to be initiated by women. And my Voodoo mother turned out actually to be the mother of the guide that I booked the trip with.
Mm.
So she was, as his mother, coming to host us for a day to do the tour of the slave route that the slaves would walk
Mm.
many years ago from the slave market to the ships. And as she was guiding us, she was sharing how her paternal lineage was one of the biggest slave traders in West Africa,
Oh,
and her
wow.
maternal lineage was enslaved. So she had this very interesting lineage from her mom and dad family line. And that's where I got very, very connected with her because my mother, her lineage were also enslaved. And my
Mm.
father's lineage were working for the VOC, which was the company that actually shipped the slaves from West Africa to South America. So we connected very strongly on that, and we both started crying. And that's when I felt like, yes, this is the right person to be initiated by. And she
Yeah.
initiated me together with her daughter. So I was surrounded by many
Wow.
women actually during my initiations.
Wow, I have goosebumps when you share this. Like,
Me too.
what a beautiful story and so touching. And yeah, it just feels like you had to be there at that moment in time with these specific people, and it was all aligned, even
Arranged.
though the history is quite painful and hurtful and traumatic. And yeah, I can
Yeah.
imagine it was also like very healing.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I really connected with, because I think all of us have our own story with our ancestors, right? I mean, everybody has like, I don't know, from wars or slavery or intensity in their lineage. And I think it's really easy to go to the pain in our
Mm.
lineage, right? And I think one of the things I learned as I was walking that slave route, there was like 7 stages the slaves would go through. One of them being spending time in complete darkness. So they would be prepared for their time in the ships where they would be underneath deck in darkness for a very long time. And I don't know if you know, but I have a really big love for dark retreats. I actually spent a total of 26 days in complete darkness. So
Oh,
there were
wow.
many things that connected to my journey as I was walking that route from the slave market to the ships. And one of the things I felt as I was walking it, and I felt my ancestors walk that route as well, was their power of overcoming,
Mm.
right? Because as they were being sold into slavery, they could have given up, but they kept walking to the next stage. And as they would go into these dark rooms where some people would starve to death or some people would just lose themselves in the fear, they continued walking. And even after that, where the weak ones were thrown into mass graves, some of them still alive, they kept walking. And as they arrived at the ship, some of them would throw themselves in the ocean and drown themselves because they didn't want to leave their land. They still decided to keep going. So I think one of the things I found is to not over focus. Sure, we can do our healing in our ancestral lineage, very important, but then also to reconnect to the power that is in there because each of our lineage has this power of overcoming, that determination to keep going because that's why we are here today. Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I feel, especially as women, we very easily connect over our shared traumas, but it's
Yes.
so much more powerful, especially as women, to connect over our shared resilience and our shared power.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, so this is such a precious gift that I found during my time in Benin. And to be clear, like the moment I said, yes, I'm going to do the initiations with you, I had no idea what I was saying yes to. That was really interesting because I arrived at her land of my voodoo mother and I stayed with her in her house. And I think it was on day 2 or something where they started to consult the IFA, which is their
Mm-hmm.
main oracle system that they do the consultations with, that decide basically everything in the tradition. It decides what you're going to eat, it decides what type of rituals and ceremonies you're going to have, it decides your, how to say, your personality, like your astrology, but then in voodoo. It decides basically everything. And so when I arrived there, I think it was on day 2 that they said, Nicole, we're actually going to shave your head. And I was like, holy shit, I actually didn't know anything about what was going to happen. So yeah, I had a few of these moments where I was like, oh my God, like what have I gotten myself into now? Right? Because there were so many things unexpected in that journey there.
Wow.
Yeah. It was
And
luckily my second time that I shaved my head in my life. So it was
mm,
not the first time, but it finally grew back and then boom, again, this shaving took place.
that in itself is already such an initiation because our hair is like
Absolutely.
so connected to our spirituality and our personality, and having to give that up for
Yes.
something higher, it's so powerful. Wow.
Absolutely, yeah. And it was because they did my IFA consultation to reveal my voodoo identity, which, like I said before, is similar to your astrology or your human design. Only their identity is revealed also through an IFA ceremony. And when they revealed my identity, they said there are so many voodoo spirits with me that I need to become a voodoo priestess. So
Oh,
they
wow.
said to me that this is only going to be your first initiation because you are born to be a voodoo priestess. So this is also why I had to shave my head to acknowledge my new identity and to embrace this big rebirth that was happening during my 2 times 1 month in Benin last year.
Wow. So
Yeah.
special. And what do you feel that this, because everything that you learned is so ancient. It's so
Yeah.
rooted in the land and what you said with the plants and the earth and the body. And how do you see this beautiful collection of ancient wisdom? How does that apply, or where does that sit in our current world?
Yeah, I find this a really beautiful question, one that I contemplate a lot. This is also why my work is called Women of Ancient Futures. Because, for example, to have voodoo as an example, it's a tradition that is over 6,000 years old. So it's from such a long time ago that in some ways I believe it doesn't necessarily fit in our modern day-to-day life, right? And also, it's a very different culture. And it's not only this West African indigenous culture, it's so far all the indigenous traditions that I've come across during my travels is that the culture is very different than how we live in our Western culture. So I think I always have been very aware to go through the initiations and the teachings and the studies, aware that I'm wearing my Western lens, first of
Mhm.
all. Like it's very easy to be judgmental or like find things strange when I come through to see it through my Western lens, right? But actually, yeah, I think it's invited to see what can I bring into my daily life that actually supports my connection to community, that actually supports my connection to spirit and nature. And you don't necessarily have to take everything literally with you. I've never been like this. I've studied with so many different traditions. I was never able to land in only one of them. It was always a collection of different traditions, different techniques, different modalities. And I would take with me what resonates and leave behind me what doesn't, because every tradition also comes with dogma. Every tradition also comes with shadow, right? So I would always say, whatever tradition it is that you're studying, to take with you what resonates and to weave that into our modern day life, because our Western society is very individualized. So I love bringing those community elements back here into my daily life, right? Our Western society is quite disconnected from nature, from plants, from spirits. So this is what I love to bring with Women of Ancient Futures, to reconnect to those things. And then if you're a lawyer and you want to weave it in your job at the office as a lawyer, beautiful. For me, it doesn't necessarily look like we need to all live separate from society in nature to be this little bubble. No, I believe that it's very much in daily life, woven through all types of professions and lifestyles.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I completely agree with that. And I feel that is also the only way it can work for most people in the Western world because we've gotten so far away from this community nature vibe that it's very hard for
Yes.
people to understand that that is even an option.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And like I said, this Western lens, I can name one example that might be also immediately the most triggering example when it comes to voodoo is that in Benin, they still work with the sacrifice of animals
Mm.
when they do their ceremonies. And this was so triggering for me when I arrived there. But then at some point I realized most of people in Benin, they don't have a fridge like we have. They don't have meat in the supermarket or, they don't go to the butcher to buy their meat. They actually buy alive animals on the market. And everybody in the family knows how to kill and clean the animal to then
Mm.
eat it. So they have a very different connection than we have with our meat and animals in that sense. So what I've also started to see is that when they do a sacrifice of an animal, they also share the meat with the community, with the family. So it's easy to then be judgmental about something, but actually, when you look deeper into the culture, it's just how they live their lives.
Yeah.
Like we have it in a very different way that we go to the supermarket or the butcher, and all the animal suffering is behind closed doors. There,
Yeah.
they actually honor the animal. They wish it well into spirit. They share the meat in the community. So it's a triggering topic that I maybe name as an example, but I do think it's a powerful example to show those differences of culture that can be easy to be judgmental about.
Yeah, I think it's a great example. Thank you for bringing that up because I think it touches the core of how we as Western people have so often through lifetimes, like my ancestors have done this, like thought that our way is the best way. And it's
Yeah,
still, it still exists, even with this whole like topic around meat and how we engage with it. It's a very white, privileged Western way of approaching it without taking into consideration that the people that you're talking about have been doing this for thousands of years, from generation to generation. They did skill share, like how to skin an animal, how to cut an animal, how to, it's a
yeah,
huge skill. Like if
yeah.
everything would fall away and that would be the only thing that we had left. Like many people in the Western world would just die because they didn't know how to do it?
Exactly. Yeah. And besides that, there are not many vegetables in Benin. Like it's actually a lot of the land is actually covered with the palm oil industry and
Mm,
cotton. So they don't actually have land for growing vegetables because it's all being used for selling cotton and palm oil. So there is a lot of nuance to examples like
yeah,
this that is easy to, yeah, it's actually beautiful to have a deeper look into. Yeah.
yeah,
I love also what you shared about the skills that have been passed on, because a lot of indigenous traditions are oral traditions, right?
yeah,
So you don't study voodoo in a book. Just like when I was with the Yawanawa people in South America, they don't pass their teachings on through written materials. It's passed on through stories, like it's passed on verbal. And this is also something that I found very, very beautiful. Like the way they teach the rituals, the invocations, the prayers, the songs. It's a very intuitive way. So you study by repeating it and practicing it until the point that it's really in your body and in your voice and in your heart.
yeah. I love
Yeah.
that. I studied with some indigenous midwives, and
Ah, beautiful.
yeah, I studied with a Colombian and a Mexican midwife, and yeah, the way that things just land. Like I
Yes.
notice when you study from books, you need to read it like multiple times. You need to hear it multiple times. You need to maybe put it into practice to understand what is written.
Yeah.
But when someone is teaching through story by showing so that you have basically it's how children learn. Like they learn
Yes.
by listening and by looking.
Yes.
And it's so much easier to embody something and understand something on such a deep level. And it just blows my mind that we have gotten to a point where we send children to school and have them sit at a desk and have them read books and take this way of learning away like so soon because it's the best way to learn, in my personal opinion.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think from the books, it lands more in our mind.
Yeah.
And through this like oral way of studying and embodied way of studying, it lands in the body.
Yeah.
And I think this is something that indigenous traditions are here to give us to,
Mhm.
to reconnect to our bodies and to reconnect to life, living our lives from our body, from
Mhm.
our voices, from our dance, from our songs. And this is what I really love about being around indigenous traditions.
I
Yeah.
so understand that. And I have loved my time with Indigenous peoples. Yeah, it's been the best, like the best experiences of my life, like hands down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What did you feel like? What were some of the biggest gifts that you received from your time with the indigenous people?
Um, well, I lived for a while in the Colombian Amazon, and it's just their knowledge of nature, knowledge of plants. I used to have
Yeah.
like an insane diarrhea attack. I was like severely dehydrated. All my Western diarrhea travel pills didn't work. And I was just there and I was like, oh my God, I'm like 6 hours from like a city, from a doctor. I am here in this jungle and I am getting more and more dehydrated and I don't know what to do. And then these
Mm.
people, there was a woman, she went out for hours upon hours to find me these special barks from a tree and leaves and all the things. And she spent like hours of her day helping me, like finding all these plants, preparing all the plants. And I remember drinking what she gave me. And I thought, like, okay, if I'm like now allergic to one of these things, like I'm gonna die here in the jungle. But I had such deep trust, like my trust was so much deeper than my fear. And she
Mm.
gave me the drink, and it tasted like a black tea, like a very strong black tea. Like the sensation was the same, like it dried my entire mouth 100 times worse than a black tea. And half
Wow.
an hour later, my fever was gone. I'd had fever for days and I
Wow.
was on the toilet for days. Half an hour later, I could just feel my body settle. And I was like, wow, these people just know. They have so much wisdom. And
Yes.
that's just one of the few experiences that I had that were so extremely powerful that had me like on hands and knees, just in gratitude, for like upholding this wisdom and being
Mm.
dedicated to the wisdom and being dedicated to passing it on. So yeah, that was just one of my experiences, but
Beautiful.
so much awe, so much gratitude.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So, what are for you the key pillars of the ancestral healing model, if we can call it that way, that you are practicing and using in your work, if you're comfortable to share?
You mean like the aspects of the traditions that I took with me to share in my work?
Yeah.
Yeah, so like one of the things I studied for a long time was evidential mediumship. So that's a
Mhm.
big part of my work. I love to support women in crystallizing their psychic abilities, connecting with their loved ones in spirit and their spirit guides. I think one of the biggest differences between a tradition like evidential mediumship and an indigenous tradition is that the way you learn to read and receive information is very specific. So it's you could say you use more of your mind and precision, whereas in the indigenous tradition, you work with the spirits by welcoming to let them dance through your body, for
Mhm.
example, right? So it's a very different approach, and I love to work with both. So that's one big part of my work, the mediumship and the psychic abilities. And then from the herbs, I really love to work with the ritual baths and the ceremonial washings. So letting women connect with the herbs, but also the spirit in the herbs, really to get to know the spirit of the most powerful herbs that I love and to learn to make their own ritual washings and ceremonial baths for themselves and for others. But it's also in the rituals that I came across in other places, you know. So it's a big blend. I don't know if I can put it down into a short answer, But I kind of picked all the things I loved from all these different traditions, and they are woven throughout all my programs, even in my
Mm.
business programs, because I have a business mastermind where I guide women in their soul businesses. But even in there, the approach very much comes from that connection to
Mm.
your body, that connection to spirits, that connection to the spirit of your business, and relating with your business as an alive entity. So I think it's something that just breathes through, yeah, everything that I offer.
So
Yeah.
beautiful.
I think it's my only way now. I would not know any other way anymore.
Yeah, I love that. And from all the things that you studied over so many years, what is the wisdom around our body cycles and our life cycles that you feel is crucial for our world?
Yeah. One of my programs is called Rite of Passage.
Mm.
And the rites of passage are like transitions in life that in the Western world, many of them we forgot to
Yeah.
celebrate or to acknowledge. I think some of them we still acknowledge, which is when we get married. We have like a really beautiful ceremony around it. And when we die, we have like the funeral, the
Yeah.
ceremony around it, even though it's approached very differently. Like when I was in Benin, I attended a funeral, and it was a funeral of a high priest. And this high priest, they do this when they're really high, like high in their rank. They do funerals of 42 days.
Oh,
So
wow.
I was at this priest's funeral. I think I was on the 41st or the 42nd day of his funeral. And I shared a video online, and it looks like a party. Like, when here in the West, when we have our funerals, it's quite sober. Most of the time we are quiet. I do think it's changing, but I would say traditionally it's very quiet, really sad, maybe even a little bit heavy. But there, it's one big party because they celebrate that person's life. And they are crying. They are also crying. They're laughing. They're dancing. So I think for the whole day that I was there, maybe they talked 3 minutes. And the rest of the time it was dancing and eating together and celebrating that person's life. So I think when it comes to our life cycles, it's these celebrations or acknowledgements of these transition moments, these rites of passage that are so much still part of the culture in indigenous cultures. So I think the ones that we have forgotten in the West is when a girl, for example, receives her first blood, her first
Yeah.
menstruation. Like in Benin, what happens is the grandmother then takes the girl by the hand, makes a really special day for her, collects specific herbs to give her a few baths during that day and during those days, hands her cloths so that she can catch her blood. So it's a moment where also the Ifa is consulted and they will do a reading for her. So there
Mm.
is a whole set of practices and celebrations and ways to acknowledge this transition for this girl. And I think many of us in the West, we don't do that anymore. And it's important because you could say an old version of us in that moment dies and a new one is born. And these rites of passage, they acknowledge that death and rebirth. And that's only one example of many, right? Also, when I recently transitioned into motherhood, my daughter is
Oh,
3.5 months.
oh,
And
congratulations.
thank you.
Oh.
And during my pregnancy, I was actually in Benin in my
Mm.
priestess initiation. So I could experience the rituals and ceremonies they do in this period of transition. And it's beautiful. So they would already do ceremonies for my daughter while she was in my womb.
Mm.
And they would already like reveal her main spirits and work with that, bring offerings to those spirits for her. And then when she was born, I was here in the Netherlands, but my voodoo mother would make ceremonies for her there. And 40 days after I gave birth to her, and this is in many indigenous traditions. I know it's in the Mexican midwifery tradition. I
Yeah.
know it's in many other traditions that 40 days after birth, you close the first birth portal
Yeah.
ceremonially and ritualistically. And it's the same in voodoo as well. In Mexico, they do this with the closing the bones
Hmm.
ritual, where you go to these 5 stages, and a really beautiful way to energetically close your body again because you've opened so much during the
Yeah.
birth. But also in voodoo, they have their ceremonies and their rituals to acknowledge those first 40 days. And I do think in some way in the Netherlands, we do have some acknowledgement around 6 weeks after birth, but it's very different. It's very different than how it's supported through ritual and ceremony. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think this deep love that I have for these rites of passage is why I came to create this program also to acknowledge these times of transitioning through ritual and ceremony.
Yeah, I love that. And I do feel that a lot of people in the Western world are actually a little bit lost because there was no acknowledgement.
Yeah.
Especially with little girls, they're just expected to like just know what to do, just know how to like put in a pad to name like a simple example. And
Yeah.
they're like not acknowledged in their journey of becoming because it's the moment where their process of becoming like the adult person starts. Like it's so big.
It's big, it's
Yeah,
huge.
it's huge.
Yes,
And yeah, it makes me so sad, that so many girls go through that alone in a moment when they actually need community the most. Like I would never like my daughters, if I ever am blessed to have them, they will get like the most beautiful ceremonies because they deserve it. It's such a
yes.
beautiful opportunity and we're not taking it.
Yeah. And I think it's also when we look at the transition into motherhood, for
Mm,
example, I think a lot of mothers are struggling with that transition because they don't fully know what's happening. And there is so much happening, like energetically. Oh my God, the amount of processes that I've been going through during my pregnancy and also the 3.5 months after now. If I would not have my friends that are doula and are deeply connected to these indigenous traditions, I think also it would have been very, very difficult for me. But they
yeah.
were like acknowledging and they were saying, it's normal. Like here, and you have a beautiful bath that you can take to help vitalize your body. Or maybe you can go to this yoni steam and help your womb in this way. Or like one friend from Spain, she sent me a really beautiful belly bind so I could bind my womb and my belly. My midwife was binding my belly through a Malaysian indigenous tradition. So
Mm,
there's so many beautiful practices. So it doesn't really matter. It doesn't have to be voodoo. It doesn't have to be South American. There's many different indigenous traditions. And if there is not one in your actual physical lineage,
mhm.
that you feel connected to, then maybe there's one in your soul lineage that you feel connected to. And you can, yeah, embrace the practices that resonate for you. I never feel there is only one way or the way. I think the way is a very dangerous thing that only
Yeah.
creates separation. So, yeah, to follow your heart because there's many, many beautiful practices that can support us in these transitions.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm in my pre-conception phase right now, so I'm like preparing to conceive at some point. And I've actually
Beautiful.
been trying to like trace back, like what did my ancestors do? Like I'm Dutch, I'm from the Netherlands,
Yeah.
and I've been looking into like, is there any wisdom on like pre-Christian communities? Because they existed in the Netherlands
Yeah.
as well. And only 2 generations ago, there was this practice of, in English, it's translated closing sheets, but in the Netherlands, they call them sluitlakens. And my
Ah,
grandmother taught me about it. And I have been looking to find like vintage sluitlakens, and I found them on like Marketplace. And
really?
yes, and I bought them. And I interviewed my grandmother on her births and on the practices when she was still alive. And she kept sharing about these closing sheets. So I was really
Amazing.
like determined to like find them so that when I have my babies, I can actually use the same fabrics and the same techniques as my grandmother used and her grandmother.
And that's
Yeah.
to close your body, just like in the
Yes.
Mexican tradition?
Yeah, so it's a cotton
Wow.
sheet, like a sheet from the bed that they make
Hmm.
into like a strong sheet, like a rebozo, and
Yeah.
then you close them and you attach them to the bed. So it's like a wrap and it wraps around in different ways. And they also have them
Amazing.
with like strings to close, like a corset almost. But the most traditional ones are the ones that you wrap around your body and then attach to the bed with closing pins, like safety pins.
Wow.
So
That's
Yeah.
so beautiful. It almost makes me want to look into it because I'm also Dutch and I would love to know more about actually the Dutch lineage in these practices.
Yeah, look it up. It's called sluitlakens, and it's
Sluitlakens.
yeah, and I do feel that the Dutch tradition has always been like a bit more practical, like the
Mhm.
close Dutch lineage that I have, like from my grandmother and my great grandmother. But I also feel there must be like longer down the line, like some spiritual connection to the land and the goddesses of the lowlands. Yeah.
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 Amazing. Thank you for sharing this. Because I
Thank you.
actually have my closing a bit later because I have a friend
Oh,
flying in from Spain to come and close me. So I actually have it in 2 weeks from now.
oh wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, look
Yeah.
into it because there used to be a company in the Netherlands that used to sell traditional sluitlakens, but they closed. But I found mine on Marketplace. So there may
Amazing.
be like some around that you can find.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will look into it. Thank you.
And for everybody listening, reclaim like your Dutch lineage with this as you're going to give birth.
Yes. Yeah, and it's a beautiful example of when we look into our lineage, whatever your lineage is, that at some point, maybe some need to look back 2 generations and some need to look back 20 generations, but
Yeah.
at some point we will come across these practices. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's beautiful to remember them and to feel them through our bodies and how right they feel.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel what it gave me, the number one gift is really arriving home within myself and in my
Mm.
body and in my root and in my roots, in my bones. Like I feel so much more landed in my body since I came back from Benin because I was able to really reconnect to my roots.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
understand that so much.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful gift that we can give ourselves, but then also when we are really embodied, we pass on that gift to our children. And I think that's the most powerful thing that we can do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Ah, I love this conversation with you. I can speak with you
Me
for like
too.
hours.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much for this beautiful conversation and your beautiful questions. It just reminds me of how much I love sharing about these things.
Yeah, you should. I'm sure many people are so inspired by you and your story and the wisdom that you're sharing. And
Mm.
to close off, I'd love to invite you to share your vision with us, your vision for specifically our cyclical experience and for communities worldwide, just so that we can
Mm.
plant seeds for the vision.
Yeah. So my vision would be that each one of us find our own true and authentic connection to our
Mm.
lineages, to the indigenous wisdom that runs through our veins, and that we can take from that whatever resonates and still feels true today. Like I said, it doesn't have to be a copy paste, but that we find our own nourishing ground in those ancient practices and wisdom and create our new futures with that. Yeah.
Yeah,
And it doesn't have to look any certain way. I think it's very much through being willing to stand in the unknown with that, deep listening, like following those synchronicities and resonance in each moment, that it naturally unfolds these new futures that are meant to come our way.
I resonate with that so much.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on and coming to share. And I hope that people get really, really inspired from our conversation. And if people want to learn more about you, where can they find you? Like, what's the best way to contact you?
Yeah, the best way is to go to my website, womenofancientfutures.com, or to my Instagram. I guess we can both link them
Yeah,
below this episode. That's the easiest way. And there you can find more about my programs, like Rites of Passage is always available to go through. Then there is my year training, Mystic Medium, where everything I shared about today is inside 1 year of studying with me, many different layers. Yeah, those are the easiest platforms to reach me through.
thank you. I will share them in the show notes so people can find them. And I just
Thank
want to
you.
say thank you again for coming on here and sharing your wisdom with us.
You're so welcome.
Okay, this wraps up today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. Want to know more about me? The best way to reach me is via @CycleSeeds on Instagram. And if you heard something today and you think, oh my God, wow, I learned something new, feel free to share the podcast on your social media and tag me, or leave a review or rating. In this way, you help me reach more people like you. Thank you so much.